600 million people died because one man said yes. In real life, he said no. You've never heard his name? You should have. It's October 27, 1962. A Soviet submarine called B-59 is sitting somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean, near Cuba, being depth-charged by American destroyers. The Americans are dropping the charges to signal the submarine to surface. They're not trying to sink it. They don't know, because nobody told them, that the submarine is carrying a nuclear torpedo. Inside B-59, the crew has been underwater for days. The air conditioning has failed. It's over 50 degrees inside the hull. Men are passing out from heat and carbon dioxide. They haven't been able to contact Moscow in hours. The captain, Valentin Savitsky, has had enough. They're attacking us, he tells his officers. We're going to war, and we will die, but we will sink them all. He orders the nuclear torpedo prepared. On a Soviet submarine, launching a nuclear weapon required the agreement of 3 officers. 2 of them said yes. The third, a man named Vasili Arkhipov, said no. 1 man, in a hot, dark submarine being depth-charged, cut off from Moscow, while his captain was having a complete breakdown. He said no. And that is the only reason you are reading this right now. But what if Arkhipov had said yes? The torpedo launches at approximately 4 p.m. on October 27th. The USS Beale, the destroyer directly above, has about 40 seconds of warning. It is not enough. The nuclear detonation is small by modern standards, about 10 kilotons, roughly the same size as the Hiroshima bomb. But a 10 kiloton explosion in the middle of a naval task force does not need to be large to be catastrophic. 3 American destroyers are sunk. The carrier USS Randolph, the task force's flagship, takes severe damage. In Washington, it's late afternoon. Kennedy is in the middle of XCOM, his crisis committee. An aide walks in and hands him a note. Kennedy reads it. Then he reads it again. The room goes very quiet. How long do we have, says Kennedy, before I have to make a decision? His national security advisor, McGeorge Bundy. Minutes, sir, maybe less. Kennedy stares at the note. He was already under enormous pressure from the military to strike Cuba. The Joint Chiefs had been pushing for an airstrike and invasion for days. General Curtis LeMay, who had previously compared Kennedy's diplomatic approach to appeasement at Munich, which didn't go over well, is now in the room, looking at his commander-in-chief. Kennedy authorizes a retaliatory nuclear strike on Soviet military installations in Cuba. It takes 11 minutes. The bombers are already in the air. Cuba goes first. American tactical nuclear weapons hit Soviet missile sites, military bases, and the port of Havana. Cuba, which didn't make this decision, which was essentially a pawn on a superpower chessboard, loses somewhere between 80,000 and 200,000 people in the first hour. Fidel Castro, in a bunker outside Havana. I told them this would happen. You told them we'd win. I told them something would happen. In Moscow, Khrushchev receives the news. He is, by multiple accounts from people who were there, a man who genuinely did not want a nuclear war. He had been the one pushing for a diplomatic solution. He had been the one overruling his own hardliners. He now has approximately 20 minutes to decide whether to launch before American missiles arrive in the Soviet Union. His military commanders are unanimous. Launch now. Khrushchev sits quietly for a long moment. Then he orders the launch. The first Soviet ICBMs leave their silos at 11:47 p.m. Moscow time. This is where it gets complicated. NATO activates immediately. Article 5, an attack on one is an attack on all, means Britain, France, West Germany, Italy, and the rest of the alliance are technically at war with the Soviet Union within hours of the first exchange. But technically, at war and launching nuclear weapons are very different things. Britain launches. The V-bombers are already at dispersal. Engines running. Britain fires its nuclear arsenal at Soviet targets within the first hour. British cities are on the Soviet target list. They know this. They launch anyway. France does not launch. Charles de Gaulle, who spent years building France's independent nuclear deterrent specifically so France didn't have to follow American orders, looks at the situation and makes a calculation. France's nuclear weapons are for France's survival, not America's war. He calls Kennedy. Charles, says Kennedy. We need no, says de Gaulle. He hangs up. France evacuates its cities and waits. West Germany has no nuclear weapons, but has American nuclear weapons stationed on its soil, and is directly in the path of the Soviet conventional army in Eastern Europe. West Germany ceases to exist as a functioning state within 48 hours, not from nuclear weapons, but from the Soviet conventional forces that cross the border when the nuclear exchange begins. China does not side with the Soviet Union. This surprises everyone, including the Soviets. The Sino-Soviet split, the ideological falling out between Mao and Khrushchev that had been building for years, means China views this as a Russian problem. Mao watches from Beijing. The imperialists and the revisionists are destroying each other. Should we do anything? We wait. The full nuclear exchange plays out over approximately 6 hours. Targeting doctrine on both sides, at least in theory, is counterforce. Hit military targets, missile silos, air bases, naval ports. Not cities, not civilians. In practice, the distinction barely matters. Moscow, hit by 12 American warheads. Population 6 million. Survivors, approximately 400,000. Mostly in the outer suburbs. The Kremlin, where Khrushchev had been, is gone within the first 40 minutes. Washington, D.C., hit by 4 Soviet warheads. Kennedy had been moved to an airborne command post, the famous Doomsday plane. 20 minutes earlier, he survives. Most of his government does not. New York, 3 warheads. The largest city in the Western Hemisphere loses an estimated 4 million people on day 1. London, 2 warheads. Paris, because France didn't launch, is not on the Soviet target list. Paris survives intact, which will matter enormously later. Leningrad, Kyiv, Minsk, Warsaw, which also didn't make this decision. Prague, Budapest, all hit. Chicago, Los Angeles, Detroit, Philadelphia. By the time the exchange is over, approximately 150 to 200 million people are dead directly from the blasts and the immediate radiation. The word approximately is doing a lot of work in that sentence. Then comes the part nobody saw coming. Mathematically, the strategists had accounted for the bombs. They had not fully accounted for what the bombs set on fire. Cities burn, industrial facilities burn, forests, ignited by the thermal pulse of hundreds of detonations across 2 continents, burn. The smoke from these fires rises into the upper atmosphere, where it spreads and stays. Sunlight decreases globally by an estimated 70%. Temperatures drop. Harvests fail. Not just in the bombed countries, everywhere. India, Brazil, sub-Saharan Africa. Countries that had no part in this conflict, that had been watching the Cuban crisis on the radio and hoping the Americans and Russians would figure it out, now face famine because the sky is the wrong color. A farmer in rural India, 1963, looking at his crops, we didn't vote for this. The global death toll from the direct exchange is somewhere between 150 and 200 million. The death toll from the famine and the collapse of global trade over the following decade is harder to count. Historians in this timeline estimate the total dead at somewhere between 600 million and 1 billion people over about 15 years. Here's what's left. The United States survives as a country, severely damaged, government in chaos, major cities gone, but the interior is intact. The Midwest, the South, the mountain states. Kennedy, governing from underground bunkers and airborne command posts, maintains enough continuity of government to prevent total collapse, just barely. The Soviet Union does not survive as the Soviet Union. The decapitation of the Soviet government. In the first exchange, Moscow gone, the entire central command structure vaporized, means nobody is giving orders. The republics fracture. Ukraine, which just had its major cities bombed by the Americans and its western regions overrun by its own army in the chaos, is in a particular kind of hell. Russia proper survives. A government reconstitutes somewhere east of the Urals, in cities that weren't targeted because they weren't important. It is not the Soviet government. It is something angrier and smaller. Britain survives but is transformed. 2 warheads hit London. The government had been partially evacuated. Parliament, the monarchy, the BBC. Fragments of all 3 make it through. Britain in 1965 is a country that still exists, but looks almost nothing like the country that went to war in 1962. And France. France, which said no, which didn't launch, which evacuated its cities and waited. France emerges from the nuclear winter with its infrastructure intact, its government intact, its population alive. De Gaulle had gambled that the Soviets wouldn't waste warheads on a country that stayed out of the fight. He was right. France in 1963 is the most powerful functioning state in the Western world. De Gaulle, surveying the situation, France will now lead the reconstruction of civilization. Should we consult with America first? No. It is slower to rebuild than anyone predicted, faster than anyone feared. By 1980, the nuclear winter has largely lifted. Agriculture recovers. Not everywhere, not evenly, but it recovers. The United States rebuilds. A new capital is established, not Washington, which remains too contaminated, but Denver, which was far enough inland to survive. The Constitution is maintained. Elections happen, which in the circumstances is remarkable. What Americans want from their government, and what they are willing to pay for it, looks very different after losing New York. Russia, the post-Soviet version, rebuilds too. It is smaller, more nationalistic, deeply traumatized. It does not trust the West. It will not trust the West for generations. This is perhaps understandable. China, which sat this one out, is by 1980 the largest undamaged economy on Earth. Mao is gone. He dies in 1976 in this timeline too, but the country that follows him is one that watched the superpowers blow themselves up from a safe distance and learned something from it. What it learned is, be self-sufficient. Trust no alliance. Build quietly. By 2025, China is the dominant world power. Not aggressively so, just present. Unavoidably, unignorable present. The United Nations, reconstituted in Geneva, New York being unavailable, spends most of its time trying to manage nuclear disarmament, which all surviving states agree on in principle and none agree on in practice. The bomb still exists. Everyone still has it. Nobody has used it since 1962. The lesson, apparently, was learned. One man in a hot submarine, being depth charged, cut off from Moscow, with a captain ordering him to end the world. Vasili Arkhipov said no. We don't know exactly why. He was a quiet man. He didn't give many interviews. He died in 1998, having outlived the Soviet Union, having outlived the Cold War, having outlived most of the people who were in that submarine with him. He said no because he wasn't certain enough to say yes. That was it. The entire survival of human civilization came down to one man not being certain enough. In our story, he was certain, and 600 million people paid for it. The submarine commander Savitsky, somewhere in an alternate ocean in October 1962, his finger on a trigger he doesn't fully understand. They're attacking us, and nobody in that submarine to say, wait, history isn't always shaped by great men or terrible ones. Sometimes it's shaped by a quiet officer in a dark room who just wasn't sure. Speaking of someone who wasn't sure, what if a very unsure French general changed the outcome of World War II?